If ever there was a show that benefits from and downright requires the critical mercy of the popular 3 episode rule, it's Stan Lee's The Reflection. The idea that you hold off on dropping a series until the end of the 3rd episode seems to have fallen out of favour among anime fans lately, and why wouldn't it? With the staggering amount of anime that comes out every season, and how much of it is only one click away, it's hard to justify lingering on a series that you're not enjoying, even for a few episodes. So then naturally, it's almost a necessity these days for shows to have a gripping first episode, just to compete in such a cutthroat roster. The promise that it might get better just isn't enough. To say that The Reflection struggled to capture me, or a good number of its audience, during its first episode is kind of an understatement. So, now that the 4th episode is out, clearing the 3 episode hurdle, what better time is there to take off the gloves and examine where the show fails? But more importantly, where, if at all, the show succeeds. And ultimately, is The Reflection worth reinstating a potentially obsolete rule one last time? Let's get this out of the way first. While stylized, the art and animation can be, quite frankly, difficult to look at sometimes. Don't get me wrong, the hero shots and close-ups can really justify the style, but otherwise it can produce some less than stellar results a little too regularly. On the whole, this is minor, and the sort of thing a viewer can get used to. Hell, I watched Ace Attorney and Berserk 2016 to completion. This is nothing. But the action during the first episode was its biggest problem. A lot of it was bizarrely slow and almost lifeless because of that. It's about as involved as combat in a turn-based RPG. Everyone waits for their turn to get a hit in. And with scenes like Eye Guy pushing the woman back into the building, the sillier aspects of the way the action is directed shine through with hilarious results. Of course I understand that not every studio can be ufotable and not every action sequence can look like this, but come on. Worse still is that the vast majority of the episode is dedicated to these action sequences, and what little dialogue there is stilted and uncomfortable, with long pauses and awkward silences. To really add insult to injury though, The Reflection decides to end its first episode with a forced and unnatural piece of exposition. It details what exactly The Reflection was, and how it affected people, as though a society with superpowers would be unfamiliar with the concept. It's ultimately a first episode with little going for it. Not much character, not much intrigue, not much reason to care. It's a bad first episode, though at least in my case, not bad enough to drop just yet. But as soon as episode 2 begins, the show gives a glimpse into potential social ramifications of The Reflection, and the rest of the episode features the genuinely engaging backstory of Eye Guy, and the smoke and mirrors that went into his debut as a hero. That's interesting. Exxon mentioning a mysterious enemy called Wraith? That's interesting. Eleanor grappling with her powers? Interesting. Did everything episode 1 should have. Next. Episode 3 builds upon the strong foundation of episode 2, expanding upon the characters of Exxon and Eleanor and how fate seems to have reluctantly brought them together. What seems like a boring B-plot branches out into unexpected but welcome character development. And it's clear by the end of episode 3 that The Reflection seems to be building an unusual team of superheroes. If you're wondering why I'm not going into any detail about how excellent episodes 2 and 3 are, it's because they're not excellent. Don't get me wrong. They're a vast improvement on the first episode. But thus far, The Reflection isn't a show that's going to join the classics. But it doesn't have to be either. By the end of the 3rd episode, The Reflection has solidified itself as a competent, fairly decent show. But more importantly, a far cry from the dull, slow, and charmless show its first episode introduced. So what does this mean for the 3-episode rule? Well, as I said before, it's antiquated to the point of being almost entirely obsolete. All it means is that in this specific instance, with this specific show, the rule is helpful to determining whether The Reflection should be watched or dropped. Despite that, The Reflection does help remind us that maybe one episode isn't enough to accurately judge a show either. If you think about how confusing, deliberately misleading, or even inept the first episode of some shows can be, the philosophy, if not the practicality, of the 3-episode rule continues to make perfect sense. And hey, if you drop The Reflection after the first episode, I can hardly blame you. But maybe after seeing this, you'll think it's worth a second chance, at least until episode 3.